The real history of Susanoo. Before empires rose on the islands of Japan, before swords were forged or shrines were carved into sacred soil, the sky itself carried a story whispered through thunder. Picture this: a boundless firmament swirling with shadows of storm clouds, their edges glowing with the pale fire of dawn. In that trembling space between light and darkness lived a presence older than memory, Susanoo, the stormborn deity whose grief could churn oceans and whose rage could fracture mountains. His name traveled on the breath of tempests, not as legend alone, but as an ancient echo of the forces that shaped the earliest beliefs of the Japanese archipelago. In the age when gods were not symbols, but cosmic beings woven from the fabric of nature, Susanoo embodied the restless spirit of the storm. He was not simply feared or worshipped. He was felt in the rumbling clouds above Izumo, in the sudden rains that blessed or devastated crops, in the winds that carried both renewal and ruin. His myth did not emerge from a single story, but from centuries of whispered traditions, each shaped by people who lived close to the sea, close to the mountains, and close to the unpredictable breath of the world. Yet beneath his thunderous power lay a sorrow that defined him. Ancient texts describe a god seeking belonging, caught between the brilliance of the heavens and the shadows of the earth. His exile, far from punishment alone, marked the beginning of a journey that would lead him through turbulent realms, toward the encounter that would carve his name into eternity, the confrontation with the monstrous serpent, Yamata no Orochi. This is the tale of storms that walked like gods, of rivalries that cracked the sky, and of a wandering spirit whose legacy still flows through Japan's ancient shrines and timeless storytelling. Here begins the real history behind the myth of Susanoo. Chapter 1: Birth Beneath Celestial Radiance. Before empires carved their paths across the islands of Japan, before shrines rose from sacred forests or prayers drifted toward the heavens on threads of incense, there existed only a quiet expanse, a world suspended between creation and silence. Picture this: a sky not yet divided between dawn and dusk, a sea still learning the rhythm of tides, and a land emerging from mist as if rising from a dream. It was in this fragile moment, after the shaping of the world, that a new force stirred within the realm of the divine. A force born not from calm or clarity, but from the wild breath of storms yet unnamed. In the heart of this mythic age stood Izanagi, the progenitor of gods and lands, returning from the underworld after a journey marked by grief and shadow. When he washed the impurities of that dark realm from his body, something extraordinary happened. From each sacred touch of water against skin, deities emerged, embodiments of light, shadow, and the forces that would one day guide the fate of humanity. According to the Kojiki, Japan's oldest surviving chronicle, three divine beings rose from this purification, radiant and powerful: Amaterasu, the sun; Tsukuyomi, the moon; and Susanoo, the storm. Their births were not simply a divine event, but a reflection of the early Japanese attempt to understand nature's vast emotional landscape. For ancient people living in tight harmony with their environment, the world was full of unseen spirits: the rustle of leaves, the crash of thunder, the glow of morning light. Each held a presence, a will. And so these siblings represented not just celestial symbols, but the living essence of the world's most potent forces. Amaterasu radiated warmth and guidance, the light that sustained life. Tsukuyomi held the cool calm of the night, a reflection of order and serenity. But Susanoo carried something different, the raw, restless breath of the storm. From the moment of his birth, legends describe him as shaking with untamed energy. His cries echoed like distant thunder. His presence stirred winds that had not yet learned their path across the sky. He was not a god of destruction, as later stories sometimes portray him, but rather a being shaped from the profound emotional currents that storms awaken: sorrow, cleansing, fear, renewal. To understand Susanoo's early nature, One must step into the world of the Jomon and early Yayo peoples, who lived beneath open skies where the moods of weather determined survival itself. In these ancient ages, storms were not mere meteorological events. They were mysteries. Sudden tempests could flatten fields. Lightning could spark fires in deep forests. Heavy rains could nourish or devastate. Through stories, early communities sought to give shape to these forces, to personify them as beings with intent, emotion, and character. And so Susanoo became a god not of blind chaos, but of powerful transformation. Storms cleanse as much as they destroy. They tear away the old to make space for the new. They shake the world so that it may breathe again. In the mythic mind of early Japan, Susanoo's restless spirit mirrored this duality. He was a divine force in search of direction, a being whose emotions were as shifting and unpredictable as the skis he embodied. Still, beneath the image of a storm god lived a deeper truth, one that early storytellers never forgot. Storms are born from imbalance. They gather when forces collide, when heat and cold, calm and tension meet in fraught harmony. And so too did Susanoo's nature arise from a place of internal conflict. Though born radiant, he was shadowed by sorrow. The chronicles describe him as weeping endlessly for his mother, Izanami, the goddess who had vanished into the underworld before his birth. His tears, it was said, welled into oceans. His grief stirred winds across the heavens. Even as his siblings rose to their appointed realms, light for Amaterasu, night for Tsukuyomi, Susanoo wandered between them, unable to find a place of belonging. This sorrow was not weakness, but symbol. It reflected a truth deeply understood by ancient Japanese spirituality. Even gods carried emotion, and the world itself breathed through cycles of creation, loss, and rebirth. Susanoo's tears embodied the human experience of grief. His storms echoed the way sorrow can overwhelm, cleanse, and ultimately reshape the heart. To those who lived close to the rhythms of nature, his story was not a distant myth, but a mirror of their own struggles with uncertainty, hope, and the fragile beauty of life. As communities grew and myth became intertwined with ritual, Susanoo's presence found its sacred home in Izumo, a region shaped by sweeping coastlines, fertile plains, and mountains clothed in mist. Izumo, with its shifting weather and roaring seas, became the perfect reflection of his nature. Archaeological evidence and early ritual practices suggest that this area was a cultural center centuries before written chronicles, rich with myths that predated the imperial narratives of the Yamato court. For the people of Izumo, Susanoo was not an outsider but a guardian, fierce, unpredictable, but deeply protective. In these early depictions, he was sometimes invoked to drive away disease or purify corrupted spaces. Storms, after all, sweep away stagnation. Winds clear the air. Rain washes the land. And so the storm god became a symbol of renewal, a being who could strip a world bare so that it might rise again in strength. Yet as stories of the three divine siblings spread across regions and dynasties, Susanoo's restless nature grew into a narrative of tension. While Amaterasu came to embody order, Susanoo embodied the wild. Their contrasting spirits reflected the duality at the heart of Japanese cosmology, the balance between harmony and volatility, creation and destruction, sunlight and storm. It was a balance that defined not only mythology, but the lived experience of people who watched rice fields thrive under gentle rains and tremble under violent winds. Still, before rivalry, before exile, before the clash that would shake the heavens, Susanoo stood as something simpler, something almost fragile beneath his thunderous form. A child of creation, born beneath the celestial radiance of a world still discovering itself. His earliest stories reveal a being shaped by longing, emotion, and the desire to belong. His storms were not weapons, but cries, calls for meaning in a cosmos where every force had its place. In the quiet spaces between these ancient lines, one finds a truth that echoes long after the myths were first recited by firelight. Storms are not born from anger alone, but from imbalance, yearning, and the shifting tides of the world's inner breath. Susanoo, in his earliest form, embodies the raw heart of nature itself, beautiful, unpredictable, and deeply human in his longing. And so, beneath the celestial radiance of creation, the storm god opened his eyes. His tears became oceans. His winds shaped mountains. His presence marked the beginning of a story that would one day touch the deepest fears and greatest hopes of the Japanese spirit. In that radiant moment of divine birth, a truth settled into the world, a truth that echoes still. Even the wildest storms begin as a whisper in the heart of creation, and even the most powerful gods rise first from longing. Chapter 2: Rivalry within the High Heavens. Before the age of emperors, before shrines rose from sacred groves and rituals shaped the rhythms of early Japan, the heavens were believed to pulse with forces that mirrored the changing world below. Picture this: a sky painted with shifting colors, where warm sunlight brushed the peaks of ancient mountains, only for storm winds to sweep across them moments later. In this vast celestial tapestry dwelled two divine powers whose contrasting energies shaped the essence of early Japanese cosmology: Amaterasu, the radiant sun, and Susanoo, the wandering storm. Their bond was forged in divine blood, yet marked by tension from the very beginning. According to the oldest chronicles, Amaterasu carried the light that guided both gods and mortals, while Susanoo bore the untamed breath of tempests. Together, they represented the balance that ancient people saw each time dawn banished night or storms broke the peace of summer skies. Their relationship was not simply myth, but reflection, a symbolic retelling of nature's eternal push and pull. As the celestial realms settled into order, Amaterasu took her place in the high plane of heaven. Her radiance became the pillar upon which harmony rested. To early agricultural communities, sunlight was life. It nourished rice fields, warmed villages, and defined the rhythm of seasons. In her mythic presence, people found hope and stability. She became the embodiment of structure, ritual, and the calm guidance that ordered the growing world. Susanoo, by contrast, walked a path marked by emotional turbulence. His restless storms swept across the heavens much as seasonal rains swept across the islands. Ancient storytellers saw in his nature the unpredictability that shaped early life: sudden winds, harsh floods, shifting weather that could turn fate in a single moment. While Amaterasu represented clarity, Susanoo carried raw emotion, the yearning and sorrow that echoed through his earliest myths. These two divine siblings, shaped by opposite forces, were destined for conflict long before any myth recorded their clash. Their rivalry emerged not from cruelty or spite, but from the natural divide between stability and upheaval. In a world where people watched crops flourish under sunlight and tremble under storm, the myths transformed environmental tension into heavenly drama. One of the earliest tales describes how Susanoo, tormented by sorrow and unable to find peace, sought to leave his divine realm. His tears shook the heavens. Winds howled around celestial palaces. To the other gods his presence became disruptive. But to Amaterasu, whose duty was to maintain harmony, his unrest carried deeper meaning. It was a challenge, a threat to the order she upheld. The chronicles say that before his departure, Susanoo approached his sister to bid farewell. But even this moment became a point of contention. Amaterasu, wary of her brother's tempestuous spirit, interpreted his arrival as hostile. She prepared for conflict, and the tension between them erupted into a contest, one that carried profound symbolic weight. Their competitions differed in version and detail, but they always circled around the same theme: order versus chaos. Some stories describe them exchanging sacred objects, each creating deities from the items of the other, testing purity and strength. Others paint Susanoo as reckless, disturbing the heavenly fields, tearing through celestial landscapes in a storm of frustration. Whatever the version, the conflict is not merely divine bickering. It reflects the interplay of sun and storm witnessed by ancient communities, cycles of brightness and disruption that defined survival. As these myths traveled across generations, early Japanese people used them as a way to understand the unpredictable world. They lived in regions where seasonal rains, typhoons, and shifting weather patterns shaped agriculture and everyday life. Storms could destroy harvests, while sunlight could restore them. By embodying these forces as siblings, mythmakers gave emotional form to the cycles that governed the islands. They described nature in terms of relationships, tensions, and reconciliations, making the invisible world of wind and light feel personal and alive. Archaeology supports this deeper interpretation. Early ritual sites suggest that communities worshipped celestial and atmospheric forces together, not as enemies, but as partners in balance. It was the stories, the poetry layered over centuries, that transformed these natural rhythms into dramatic conflict. Susanoo's wildness and Amaterasu's radiance became archetypes of emotional and environmental contrast. Yet beneath the rivalry lies something even more profound. Susanoo's actions, though disruptive, were not without purpose. Storms cleanse. They strip away stagnation. They bring new life through rain and wind. Amaterasu's light, though nurturing, can scorch when too strong. The myths remind us that neither chaos nor order exists alone. They coexist in perpetual motion, shaping the world through cycles of change. Still, myth rarely softens conflict. As Susanoo's emotional turmoil intensified, his storms grew wilder. Tales describe him tearing up the heavenly fields, uprooting boundary posts, and letting loose winds that shook the celestial plane. His grief, unchecked, became a tempest without direction. Each step he took seemed to unravel the fragile harmony of the heavens. And with each disruption, Amaterasu felt her authority challenged, the stability of light threatened by the roar of encroaching storm. One myth, preserved through ritual and recitation, tells of Susanoo hurling a flayed horse into Amaterasu's sacred weaving hall, a place of craftsmanship and quiet creation. The act shattered the peace of heaven, sending the sun goddess into hiding. This moment symbolizes more than divine anger. It reflects an ancient understanding. When storms overwhelm, sunlight retreats. When chaos breaks boundaries, even the brightest guiding force withdraws. The result was cosmic darkness, a world without light. This story would echo for centuries, shaping rituals, festivals, and the spiritual understanding of the Japanese people. It explains eclipses and long seasons of rain. It gives voice to the fear that natural imbalance can plunge the world into shadow. And in its telling, the rivalry of Amaterasu and Susanoo becomes not just myth, but reflection of the fragile balance upon which life depends. Yet even in conflict, the myths carry hope. For no storm lasts forever. No sun stays hidden. Through the eventual reconciliation of these divine forces, early storytellers taught that harmony must be restored through understanding, humility, and renewal. The tension between Susanoo and Amaterasu ultimately becomes the foundation of cosmic balance, a cycle of disruption and peace that mirrors the turning of seasons. In the quiet spaces between these ancient lines, a truth emerges. The gods were reflections of the world's deepest rhythms. Their rivalries were the sky's own language. Their emotions were the wind and light that shaped every dawn, every harvest, every storm. And so the high heavens trembled beneath the weight of two forces destined to clash, one born of radiant order, the other forged from restless storm. Their conflict was not a tale of enemies, but of siblings whose natures carved the balance of creation itself. Through their struggle, ancient Japan learned to understand its skis, its seasons, and the fragile harmony between calm and tempest that still governs the land today. In their rivalry lives a timeless truth. Even the brightest light is defined by the shadow of the storm, and every storm is shaped by the longing for the light it chases. Chapter 3: The Exile from Takamagahara. Before the world knew the calm of ordered seasons, before sunlight and storm learned to share the sky, a single moment in the high plane of heaven marked the turning point in a god's destiny. Picture this: the celestial realm trembling beneath the weight of grief, its shimmering fields bent by winds that carried the breath of a storm god torn between sorrow and fury. This was the final threshold, the moment when Susanoo, the tempest born of divine tears, stood on the edge of exile. The heavens had endured his unrest for as long as they could. His grief for Izanami had grown into a force that no deity could quiet. His storms tore at the borders of celestial order, and his reckless actions, from uprooting the sacred fields to the catastrophic disruption of Amaterasu's weaving hall, shook Takamagahara to its core. In these myths, ancient storytellers captured something timeless: the way unchecked sorrow transforms into chaos, how emotion without direction can bring worlds to the brink of shadow. When Amaterasu hid within the heavenly rock cave, withdrawing her light from all creation, the other gods gathered, shaken and afraid. Darkness covered the heavens. On earth, rivers froze, crops faltered, and the rhythms of life threatened to break. It was not merely the actions of a storm god that drove the heavens into crisis. It was the overwhelming imbalance he represented. And so, in the aftermath of restored light, when Amaterasu finally emerged from her hiding place, a decision formed among the gods. The celestial order required renewal, and for renewal to begin, the source of disruption had to fall. It is said that Susanoo stood silent as the decree was spoken. No roar of thunder shook the sky. No tempest answered. Instead, there was only the steady weight of realization, a truth that stories across cultures echo. Even divine beings must face the consequences of their own storms. His exile was not an act of vengeance, but of restoration. Ancient Japanese spirituality saw the world as a delicate balance of forces. When one tipped too far, it was the duty of the cosmos to correct itself. His banishment carries symbolic meaning that extends far beyond the myth. In early Japanese belief, purity and pollution shaped every spiritual act. If a force became too wild, too clouded by sorrow or rage, it risked spreading disorder. To cast Susanoo from Takamagahara was to cleanse the heavens, a ritual of cosmic purification. In this, the myth mirrors real Shinto practice: restoration through separation, harmony through recalibration. Yet exile is never simple. As Susanoo prepared to descend, something within him shifted. The stories describe him not as defiant, but reflective, a storm beginning to lose its violent edge. His chaotic grief, no longer fed by divine surroundings, began to settle into something else. This is the moment where myth touches human truth. The journey away from one's home, whether forced or chosen, often becomes the beginning of transformation. For Susanoo, exile was the path toward becoming more than a storm god feared for destruction. It was the beginning of becoming a guardian of renewal. The descent from Takamagahara unfolds in imagery as powerful as any epic carved into stone. Picture the storm god standing at the threshold of heaven, beneath a sky split between radiance and shadow. Below him stretched the realm of mortals, a world of shifting coastlines, rising mountains, and valleys carved by rivers that echoed like distant hymns. As he stepped from the celestial plane, winds spiraled around him, scattering fragments of cloud like torn silk. His fall was not a plunge, but a passage, a slow and thunderous crossing from divine height to earthy destiny. Along the way, the world responded to his presence. Storm clouds gathered across the horizon, drawn to him like wandering children seeking their master. Rivers swelled, and distant forests bowed under sudden winds. But beneath this power throbbed something softer, a sorrow that had emptied itself. The farther he moved from the heavens, the quieter his storms became. The myth speaks of his tears falling one last time, forming sacred rivers that brought new life to the land. In this, storytellers wove a truth recognized by ancient cultures around the world. Destruction and renewal are threads of the same cloth. His descent can be understood through an archaeological lens as well. Early communities in the Izumo region held rituals and festivals dedicated to deities associated with storms, fertility, and purification. These traditions suggest that the myth of Susanoo's exile was shaped not only by courtly chronicles, but by local beliefs passed down through generations. To the people of Izumo, a storm descending from the heavens was not a curse, but a sign of powerful transformation, a force that could both destroy and revive. As he neared the mortal realm, Susanoo's presence changed once more. Storms no longer raged around him. The winds grew calmer, as if recognizing that their master's journey had entered a new phase. He approached the land with steps that carried the weight of regret, longing, and an emerging purpose. The myths describe the world beneath him shifting in response, not recoiling, but preparing. Because exile, in its deepest sense, is not the end of belonging. It is the threshold to becoming something new. For Susanoo, this meant setting aside the wild grief that had marked his time in the heavens. No longer surrounded by celestial perfection, he stepped into a world shaped by imperfection, a world of soil, rivers, life, and death. And in that imperfection, he found space to grow. The descent from Takamagahara marks the moment when Susanoo changed from a force of imbalance to a deity capable of creation, protection, and deep transformation. In the language of myth, this change is hinted through the landscapes he crosses. As he moved toward Izumo, the land responded with signs of both fear and welcome. Winds whispered through forests, mountains rumbled softly, rivers shimmered with new movement. In each step, ancient people found a metaphor for the passage from chaos to renewal, a journey reflected in the turning of seasons, the cycles of storms, and the shifts of human emotion. By the time Susanoo reached the borders of the mortal world, he was no longer the same god who had shaken the heavens. His storms had learned restraint. His sorrow had softened into a deep, steady weight. The chaos he once embodied had begun to transform into the potential for protection and change. And though the path ahead would still be marked by trials, including confrontations with serpents, spirits, and the shadows that haunted the land, he had crossed the most important threshold. Exile was never meant to break him. It was meant to remake him. In this, the myth reveals its oldest truth. Transformation often begins the moment one steps away from what was familiar. Renewal is born in distance, in the space between who one was and who one must become. For Susanoo, the god of tempests, the fall from Takamagahara was not a punishment, but the beginning of becoming a guardian of Izumo, a deity who would shape not only the land, but the spiritual heart of ancient Japan. And so, through winds that had finally calmed, the storm god descended, stepping from heaven into the world that waited to redefine him. In the hush of that passage lived a quiet revelation. Even the fiercest storms must one day leave the sky behind, not to vanish, but to learn where their power truly belongs. Chapter 4: Wanderings Across the Mortal Plains. Before the first shrines rose from sacred groves, before myth and memory wove themselves into unbroken lineage, the mortal realm lay vast and untamed beneath the descending storm god. Picture this: a land shaped by wind and water, its mountains sharp as blades of ancient stone, its rivers carrying whispers of worlds older than language. Into this landscape, Susanoo stepped, no longer a deity of the high heavens, yet not fully a wanderer of earth. His exile had cast him into the space between realms, where every river bend and coastline became a verse in the unfolding story of his transformation. As he moved across the mortal plains, the world seemed to shift around him. Storm clouds followed like distant echoes of his former nature, gathering behind him but never fully releasing their fury. The winds stirred the grasses, bending them in long, sweeping arcs that marked his passage. To early communities, these sudden gusts were not merely weather, they were signs. In an age when every natural change carried meaning, The presence of a wandering storm was interpreted as communication from the divine, a reminder that unseen forces walked the earth. Susanoo's journey likely flowed along routes that mirrored the earliest trade paths of ancient Japan. These paths were not the straight, carved roads of later eras, but winding trails that followed rivers and coastlines, tracing the natural movements of people and goods. Archaeologists have uncovered traces of these early networks, pottery, tools, beads, offering glimpses into how distant villages once connected through commerce and shared belief. As Susanoo moved across these landscapes in myth, the communities who lived along these routes shaped stories to explain sudden storms, shifting winds, and the unpredictable nature of the sea. In the shadow of broad river valleys, people believed that spirits dwelled in every bend of water. The rivers themselves were seen as living entities, carriers of blessings, but also bringers of destruction when their currents swelled. As Susanoo passed near these waterways, myths describe the riverbeds trembling and the currents rising in recognition. But unlike the violent storms he once unleashed in Takamagahara, these earthly shifts carried a different tone. They were not expressions of chaos, but of acknowledgement, the land sensing the arrival of a deity in search of purpose. Forests, too, became central to his wandering myth. Picture towering cedars stretching toward the sky, their trunks broad and weathered, their roots gripping the earth like ancient guardians. In Shinto thought, forests have long served as gateways between the physical and spiritual worlds. To early villagers, the rustling of leaves in sudden wind gusts signaled the presence of forces beyond sight. Susanoo's passage through these woods became a way to explain those moments when branches bent unexpectedly or fog drifted low across the ground. Through him, nature's unpredictable movements gained emotional depth. As he walked these plains, Susanoo's presence slowly shifted from feared to revered. Storms were destructive, yes, but they also carried transformation. They cleared stagnant air, brought crucial rains, and renewed the soil. In coastal communities, where typhoons could wreck boats yet deliver prosperity through nutrient-rich tides, storms were both enemy and ally. This duality matched Susanoo's own nature. It is no wonder ancient people turned to him for protection against unseen dangers, even as they acknowledged the power he wielded. Some of the earliest shrines connected to Susanoo's worship appear along these natural corridors, places where storm winds met human settlements. Though later chronicles formalized his myths, the oldest practices likely came from small villages where people sought safety from floods or prayed for bountiful rain. These communities did not see Susanoo as a god of malice, but as a traveling guardian whose moods reflected the delicate balance of nature. When storms passed without destruction, they believed he had shown restraint. When winds rattled rooftops but spared the fields, they saw mercy. Folklore from the Izumo region, where Susanoo's legend eventually roots itself, suggests that many of these early stories were carried orally through generations. Travelers and traders moving along coastal routes brought tales of sudden whirlwinds, strange lights along riverbanks, and storm clouds that formed without warning. Over time, these scattered accounts merged into a unified narrative of a wandering deity whose footsteps shaped the land. In this way, Susanoo's journey became a kind of spiritual map, connecting distant communities through shared belief. The archaeological record supports this blended evolution. Pottery fragments bearing storm motifs, early ritual objects buried near riverbanks, and foundations of shrines aligned with wind patterns reveal a world where natural forces were worshipped with deep reverence. Storms, like life itself, were unpredictable, and so the deity who embodied them became both protector and challenger. His temperament mirrored the elements that governed early survival, giving him a presence both feared and sought. Yet beneath these outer expressions of awe, Susanoo's journey carried an inward transformation. Each landscape he crossed reflected back to him a new aspect of existence. The forest showed him stillness, The rivers taught him flow, and the coastlines revealed the vastness of the world beyond divine realms. With every step, the wild grief that had defined him began to soften. He was still a storm god. The winds never fully left his side, but the fury in his heart had quieted. The mortal realm, with all its imperfections and vulnerabilities, grounded him. Picture him standing on a windswept cliff overlooking a restless sea. The waves rise and fall in rhythmic motion, echoing the steady pulse of the world below. Here, Susanoo witnesses something the heavens never offered him, the raw beauty of impermanence. The sea is never still, yet never in constant upheaval. Its balance is earned through continuous movement, just as his own path now demanded. In that moment, one preserved in myth through images of coastal shrines and sacred rocks bound by ropes, the storm god begins to understand the purpose of his wandering. He moves inland again, following the faint lines of ancient footpaths. Villagers watch from a distance when sudden winds sweep across their fields, bending stalks of rice in patterns they later attribute to his passing. Elders tell children that Susanoo walks the earth now, carrying with him both warning and protection. His presence becomes woven into agricultural rituals meant to safeguard against drought, flood, and disease. He is no longer merely a force of celestial punishment. He becomes a guardian whose steps resonate through human memory. By the time these stories were inscribed into early collections like the Kojiki and Nihon Shoki, his wandering had already shaped centuries of belief. The mortal plains of Japan, with their shifting weather, rugged coastlines, and sacred forests, had carved themselves into his identity. Where once he embodied unrestrained storm, he now carried the deeper lesson that power must be tempered by purpose. And so his journey across the mortal realm stands as more than an exile. It is a pilgrimage, one that transformed him from a deity of unchecked force into a protector who walks beside those who face the uncertainties of nature. In the quiet spaces of riverside shrines and windswept coastlines, ancient people found comfort in the belief that the storms moving across their skis were guided by a presence that understood both fury and sorrow. In the end, Susanoo's wanderings reveal a truth that echoes through all myth. Even the most chaotic forces can become guardians when shaped by experience, reflection, and the vastness of the world itself. Through his steps across the mortal plains, the storm god began his long journey toward becoming more than the sum of his tempests, a deity woven into the heart of nature, memory, and the enduring spirit of ancient Japan. Chapter 5. Arrival in the land of Izumo. Before kingdoms rose, before emperors traced their lineage to the divine, the western reaches of ancient Japan were shaped by a land of mist, rituals, and memory. Picture this: a coastline brushed by grey waves, the horizon lined with drifting fog, and forests so dense that light entered only as scattered shards. This was Izumo, a place where the boundary between the divine and the mortal felt thin, where stories clung to the wind like old prayers. And into this world, torn from the heavens and carrying the residue of storms, descended Susanoo. His fall from Takamagahara had shaken mountains and stirred seas, but here his arrival was met not with celestial anger, but with human silence, the quiet watchfulness of people who understood that nature was not distant from their lives. In Izumo, storms were not metaphors. They were living forces that could sweep away harvests or breathe life into the land. To these early communities, a god wrapped in tempestuous power was not an intruder, but a revelation. The chronicles tell us that Susanoo landed near a river that flowed like a silver thread through the wilderness. Archaeologists have long studied the Izumo region, uncovering ancient settlements, ceremonial artifacts, and sacred sites that point toward a culture deeply intertwined with the environment. Long before written records, people here lived within a rhythm shaped by tides, storms, and seasons. In their worldview, gods did not rule from distant heavens. They walked beside rivers, lingered at mountain passes, and whispered through groves of ancient cedar. Thus, When Susanoo touched the mortal realm, the land itself seemed to recognize him. In the shadow of those great trees, he began his wandering. His steps followed the contours of the region, valleys carved by time, marshlands where reeds swayed like soft voices, and cliffs that stared endlessly at the sea. These landscapes later became the sacred geography of his myth, marked by shrines built to honor moments preserved only in oral tradition. Each location spoke to the belief that the divine does not merely appear in places of grandeur, but in the quiet corners of the earth where people looked for meaning. Yet Izumo was more than wilderness. It was a cradle of early clan power, home to traditions older than the imperial line that would later dominate Japan's history. Ritual leaders, known as Kuni no Miyatsuko, watched over the land, guiding ceremonies that intertwined community, nature, and spirit. Their authority shaped local politics and belief systems, creating a world where myth and governance overlapped. In this environment, Susanoo was not a foreign deity descending uninvited. He was a storm made flesh, a presence that validated the people's understanding of the earth as alive and responsive. Myths describe his arrival not with thunderous fanfare, but with a scene rooted in humility and transformation. As Susanoo walked through Izumo, he carried the weight of his exile from the heavens, the memory of familial conflict, the sting of punishment, and the lingering fire of storms he could no longer unleash without consequence. The people of Izumo, living in a land shaped by natural volatility, recognized something familiar in him. They understood the duality of destruction and renewal. They had seen rain bring both flood and harvest. They had watched the sea swallow boats and deliver bounty. In Susanoo's unsettled spirit, they saw the nature of the world itself. Early shrine traditions reflect this connection. Many of Izumo's oldest sacred sites are dedicated not to gods of calm clarity, but to forces that represent change, protection, and the thin line between survival and loss. These shrines, built with heavy wooden beams and thatched roofs, stood like guardians against a world in flux. They became places where storms were acknowledged, respected, and woven into ritual practice. Susanoo's presence in their stories echoes this worldview. He becomes a divine protector not by embodying peace, but by mastering tumult. Picture the riverbanks where these stories first took shape. Families gathered near flickering fires, telling of the god who fell from the sky and walked among them. Children listened as elders spoke of his fierce eyes, his restless spirit, and the way the land shifted subtly in his wake. These tales were not simple entertainment. They taught how to understand fear, how to survive uncertainty, and how to see meaning in the unpredictable patterns of nature. Susanoo, in their telling, was the bridge between terror and resilience. As he moved through Izumo, the landscape itself mirrored his emotional journey. The forests he passed through seemed older, as though they remembered times before creation myths were ever spoken. The wind carried scents of distant seas, and the mountains stood like silent witnesses to his transformation. Every step pulled him further from the chaos of his exile and closer to the role he would one day claim, not as a god defined by wrath, but as one shaped by the journey through it. From a historical perspective, Izumo's prominence in early mythology is no accident. Long before the Yamato court consolidated power, the Izumo region held deep spiritual significance. Some scholars suggest that its myths reflect an older stratum of belief, one that survived even as new political powers redefined Japan's cosmology. Susanoo's arrival here, therefore, is more than narrative setting. It represents the merging of divine tradition with regional identity. His story becomes the vessel through which Izumo declared its ancient authority. But myths do not survive simply because they are old. They endure because they speak to truths that people recognize within their own lives. Susanoo's descent into Izumo resonates with anyone who has felt displaced, anyone who has wandered between worlds seeking purpose. His arrival embodies the idea that exile is not an end, but a beginning, a path toward understanding that emerges only when pride and power fall away. As the chapter closes, picture Susanoo standing at the edge of a wide plain, the grass swaying like waves beneath a grey sky. He is no longer the storm tearing at the gates of heaven, nor the outcast plummeting through cloud and air. Here, in the quiet vastness of Izumo, he is something new, a spirit tempered by journey, waiting for the moment his destiny will reveal its shape. The land recognizes him, the people sense him, and the myth prepares to evolve. In this pause between exile and purpose lies the truth that still echoes today, that even forces born of chaos can find a place of belonging, and that the world's most powerful stories often begin not in triumph, but in the quiet aftermath of falling. Chapter 6: The Weeping House of Ashinazuchi. Before heroism is born, there is always a moment of stillness, the quiet breath before destiny reveals itself. Picture this: a river winding through Izumo like a pale ribbon of sorrow, its surface trembling beneath the weight of gathering dusk. The air is heavy with the scent of wet earth, and the faint sound of cicadas flickers in and out like distant memories. Along this riverbank, in a humble wooden dwelling darkened by grief, Susanoo encountered the sorrow that would transform his wandering into purpose. The chronicles describe the home of Ashinazuchi and Tenazuchi as simple, built from timber shaped by river winds and time. It was not the kind of place where gods were expected to pause, nor where legends typically began. Yet ancient storytellers understood that great myths grow from quiet corners of human fear. When Susanoo approached the doorway, he found the couple trembling, not from his presence, but from a pain that clung to the very walls of their home. Inside, shadows moved like memories. The elders were weeping, their faces carved by years of loss. Their tears were not the sudden kind, but the slow, heavy grief that settles into the heart like winter frost. Through these tears, Susanoo learned of the terror that haunted the land. Yamata no Orochi, the eight-headed serpent whose coming was marked by trembling earth, rising mist, and the cold hiss of the river turning violent. Each year, they said, one of their daughters had been taken, 7 gone. Only the youngest remained, trembling, pale and fragile as the last leaf clinging to a tree in autumn. The weeping of this family was not an isolated sorrow. It was a whisper of a deeper fear shared across early Japan, where serpents symbolized the unpredictable violence of rivers and storms. This myth was their way of explaining the forces that shaped and destroyed their world. In this moment, Susanoo's journey shifted. No longer was he the exiled storm god wandering without purpose. Here, standing in the soft glow of a flickering hearth, he confronted the oldest sorrow known to humanity, the helplessness of those who cannot protect the ones they love. The storm within him, once destructive and directionless, began to focus. Ancient storytellers understood this transformation as the moment when a tempest becomes a shield. To understand the full weight of this story, we must step deeper into the real world that birthed it. In early Japanese belief, serpents were not merely animals. They were symbols of rivers swelling beyond control, devouring farmland and tearing through villages. They were the embodiment of nature's untamed force. And for communities dependent on rice agriculture, rivers were both lifelines and looming threats. The story of Yamata no Orochi grew from this precarious balance, a way of giving shape to the dangerous cycles of flood and drought. Ashinazuchi and Tenazuchi, in their grief, represent every family who lived at the mercy of these waters. Their children taken, one by one, echo the unpredictable tragedies that shaped early life along river systems. The myth preserved this emotional truth, turning natural fear into a story that could be carried through generations. Now imagine Susanoo standing before them, listening to their trembling voices. His presence filled the small home like a gathering storm, yet his heart was no longer consumed by anger alone. His exile had carved a space for empathy. He understood loss, not the loss of family in mortal terms, but the loss of belonging, of purpose, of a place in the world. The grief he saw reflected something deep within him, and for the first time since his fall from Takamagahara, the path before him became clear. Picture the scene outside their home. The river flowing with a cold, steady pulse, reeds shifting in the evening wind, the mountains gathering shadows like folded wings. This was the world that early storytellers knew, a world where people looked to the heavens and found gods who shared their fears and their courage. Susanoo's decision to help the grieving family was not the action of a distant deity, but the choice of a spirit shaped by wandering, sorrow, and sudden understanding. The transformation began with a single breath. Susanoo stepped beyond the threshold of the weeping house and gazed upon the land that had welcomed him despite his exile. In the murmurs of the river, he sensed the presence of Orochi, not merely as a monstrous creature, but as a force tied to the very life of Izumo. In mythic tradition, Susanoo does not simply fight a beast. He confronts nature itself, the raw and unpredictable heartbeat of a world that humans struggled to endure. To the people of Izumo, this moment marked the rise of a protector. Shrines later built in Susanoo's honor reflect the deep gratitude of communities who saw him as a guardian against floods, storms, and serpentine terrors. Archaeological finds from the region, ritual objects, river-facing altars, and ancient wooden structures reveal how deeply intertwined belief and environment were. The myth preserved this connection, encoding spiritual truths in the form of divine battles. Back inside the home, the young daughter, Kushinadaheim, stood trembling beside her parents. Her fate seemed sealed, yet the arrival of Susanoo breathed hope into the room like a sudden burst of spring wind. Although the story often centers on the coming battle, it is this moment of human vulnerability that gives the myth its enduring power. Early storytellers crafted it to show that courage does not begin with strength. It begins with compassion. As Susanoo listened to their story, the weight of their loss settled over him like a mantle. His earlier storms, born from divine frustration, seemed distant now. The tempest within him reshaped into something sharper, calmer, and resolute. He promised protection, not with the arrogance of a god asserting power, but with the quiet certainty of one who understands that purpose is forged in the presence of suffering. The encounter at the Weeping House is the hinge on which Susanoo's mythology turns. It is the place where exile becomes duty, where wandering becomes destiny, and where a storm learns to fight not for destruction, but for life. The ancient storytellers crafted this moment to teach that even the most tumultuous forces of the world can become guardians when guided by compassion and understanding. As this chapter closes, picture Susanoo standing outside the house once more, the river gleaming like steel under the moonlight. The wind gathers around him, recognizing the storm within. Ahead lies the lair of Yamato no Orochi, a serpent born from the fears of ages, waiting in the shadows of myth. Behind him, the last daughter clings to hope, and her parents breathe prayers into the quiet night. In this stillness, before the clash of storm and serpent, a truth emerges, that the greatest battles in legend begin not with anger, but with the simple, profound resolve to end someone's suffering. Chapter 7: The Serpent That Ruled the Valley. Before the clash of gods and monsters, before steel met scale and thunder met shadow, there was a valley shaped by water, a place where rivers moved like living veins, carrying both life and destruction. Picture this: a vast landscape where 8 winding streams cut through the soil of ancient Izumo, twisting like serpents beneath the shifting light of dawn. Mist clung to the earth like a second skin, and the sound of rushing water echoed between mountains as though the valley itself breathed in heavy, rhythmic waves. It is here, in this cradle of water and stone, that the legend of Yamato no Orochi was born. Ancient texts describe Orochi with 8 heads and 8 tails, its eyes burning like crimson embers, its body stretching across valleys in impossible length. But every myth, no matter how wondrous, grows from the soil of lived experience. To understand the serpent is to understand the world that created it, a world shaped by rivers that could nurture or annihilate, depending on the whims of nature. Early communities lived in constant negotiation with these waters, praising them for their blessings and fearing them for their violent appetites. For the people of Izumo, serpents were not merely creatures. They were symbols of the river's endless coils. When floods swept through villages, destroying crops, sweeping away homes, and altering the landscape, it felt as though a colossal beast had risen from the depths to devour what humans had built. The 8 heads of Orochi mirrored the 8 tributaries that flowed into the Hie River, each capable of bringing ruin after long periods of rain. The tale preserved this truth, that nature, beautiful and bountiful, could also be monstrous. Picture the valley after a season of storms. The rivers, swollen with relentless rain, weave across the land like shimmering serpents. Trees bend beneath the weight of water-laden winds. The ground softens, shifts, cracks. Entire paths disappear beneath churning currents. For early agricultural communities, such devastation was not an event. It was a terror that shaped their rituals, prayers, and stories. As long as they lived beside these waters, the myth of a mighty serpent was inevitable. Mythology offered explanation where language faltered. Instead of saying, "The rivers have flooded," communities spoke of Orochi awakening. Instead of acknowledging shifts in the landscape, they described the serpent coiling and uncoiling its vast body. These stories gave shape to overwhelming natural forces, transforming them into beings that could be understood, feared, and ultimately, in the case of Susanoo's tale, defeated. But the legend held deeper meanings. The 8 heads and 8 tails also reflected early cosmological beliefs, where numbers carried symbolic weight. 8 represented boundaries, cycles, and transitions, the line between safety and danger, order and chaos. Orochi was not only a monster, it was the physical embodiment of imbalance, a guardian of the threshold between the known world and the untamed wild. To the people of Izumo, Orochi represented everything they could not control. Its presence haunted the valley in stories whispered beside hearths and sung in ritual chants. In the oldest accounts, the serpent was said to move with the rhythm of storms, appearing as fog rolling through forests or as sudden winds that disturbed the stillness of night. Even the earth's trembling, caused by landslides or shifting riverbeds, was attributed to Orochi's restless motion beneath the soil. Now imagine Susanoo standing at the edge of this valley. The storm god, once cast from the heavens, now faced a beast born from the fears of mortals. As he gazed over the land, he saw not merely a creature, but the physical manifestation of a struggle as old as humanity, the effort to survive in a world where nature cared nothing for human sorrow. His battle would not be one of divine pride alone. It would be a defense of the fragile lives woven through the valley below. Before the confrontation, Susanoo traveled along the riverbanks, observing the marks left by the serpent's path. Fallen trees, deep grooves in the earth, stones scattered as though cast aside by an ancient hand. These details, though mythic in retelling, reflect the very real destruction recorded in early Izumo traditions, memories of floods that carved new routes through the land, altering rivers overnight. The storytellers who later shaped Susanoo's legend wove this environmental history into the narrative, preserving the valley's scars as part of a divine encounter. Archaeologists studying Izumo's early settlements have uncovered evidence of significant flood cycles, each leaving behind layers of sediment and disrupted structures. These remnants echo the patterns described in Orochi's myth, destruction recurring year after year, leaving families vulnerable and communities in mourning. Through the lens of myth, each flood became another sacrifice claimed by the serpent, another daughter taken from Ashinazuchi's household, another reminder of nature's relentless force. This is where the spiritual dimension of the story deepens. Orochi was not depicted as purely evil. It was terrifying, yes, but its terror grew from its scale, not its malice. Like the rivers, it followed a rhythm beyond human understanding. Ancient Japanese beliefs often blurred the line between gods, spirits, and natural elements. Orochi existed within this framework, a creature whose power reminded people of their place in a vast, unpredictable world. When Susanoo accepted the family's plea for help, he was not preparing to slay a simple beast. He was preparing to confront the embodiment of everything that had shaped the valley's identity, the destructive cycles that governed life beside the rivers, the fears that whispered through generations, the unpredictable balance between creation and ruin. Picture the valley on the night before the battle. Heavy clouds gather above the mountains, carrying the scent of distant rain. The river glows faintly under the moonlight, its surface smooth but tense, as though waiting for something to stir beneath. The villagers shut their doors early, whispering prayers to any spirit who might listen. And somewhere in the dense wetlands beyond the fields, the serpent sleeps, its breath rising like smoke, its body coiled around itself, vast and silent. The tension in the air mirrors the tension in the myth. This is the moment before nature surges, before storms break, before gods intervene. In that stillness, the valley holds its breath, the same way legends hold the breath of time. The significance of Orochi's myth endures not just because of the battle that follows, but because it captures the ancient relationship between humans and nature, a relationship defined by awe, fear, and fragile hope. When storytellers of Izumo shaped this tale, they were not simply creating a monster. They were carving a truth into the memory of their people, that the forces shaping their lives were immense, unpredictable, and deserving of reverence. Orochi became the face of nature's ferocity. Susanoo became the force that confronted it, and the valley, carved by rivers and held together by faith, became the stage upon which humanity's oldest struggle unfolded. As this chapter closes, picture the serpent once more in the dim light of dawn. Its scales glisten like wet stone. Its 8 heads rise in slow, deliberate rhythm. It is not anger that drives it, but instinct, the ancient pulse of rivers moving through the earth. And somewhere, not far away, the storm god gathers his strength. The valley is no longer ruled by fear alone. A storm is coming, not to destroy, but to confront the darkness woven into the land itself. Chapter 8. Forging a Divine Strategy of Courage. Before the storm breaks, there is always preparation, a measured pause, a gathering of will, a turning of intention into action. Picture Susanoo standing at the edge of the Izumo Plains, the river murmuring nearby, reeds bending under the gentle weight of evening wind. Across the darkened wetlands, the coils of Yamata know Orochi stir, each ripple of water betraying the immense power that sleeps beneath. In this quiet, before confrontation, the storm god's greatest act begins, not with force, but with thought, ritual, and foresight. The chronicles tell us that Susanoo did not rush blindly into battle. He observed, he listened, and he crafted a strategy that blended cunning with ceremony. He understood that brute strength alone could not conquer a creature so entwined with the very fabric of the land. The serpent was not merely a monster. It was the embodiment of rivers, storms, and ancient fears. To confront, it required more than might. It required reverence for the forces at play and the wisdom to turn natural elements to one's purpose. Central to his plan was the creation of sacred sake, a potent brew designed to entice the serpent into vulnerability. In the oldest records, the beverage is described as sweet, intoxicating, and ceremonially prepared, each cup consecrated through purification and prayer. Scholars suggest that these steps mirror early agricultural rites, in which rice, water, and fermented spirits were offerings to deities and the land itself. Sake was not merely drink. It was a vessel of intention, a bridge between human action and divine will. By presenting it to Orochi, Susanoo was both honoring and controlling the natural force he sought to subdue. The preparation itself was ritualized. Susanoo constructed 8 large vats, each aligned with the head of the serpent, and filled them with the sacred brew. The number 8, symbolic in early Japanese cosmology, represented cycles, transitions, and thresholds, an acknowledgement that the battle to come was as much about spiritual alignment as it was about martial prowess. This methodical arrangement transformed the confrontation into an act of sacred geometry, a plan encoded with the wisdom of generations who had sought balance between humanity and the natural world. Pause to consider the setting. Twilight creeping over the forested hills, the river reflecting fading light, the wind carrying the scent of wet earth and fermenting grain. Every element becomes part of Susanoo's strategy, every sound a measure of timing, every shadow a test of patience. The god's mind, once storm-tossed and chaotic, now moved with deliberate clarity, guided by ritual knowledge that predated his exile. Preparation was not just physical. It was an alignment of spirit with the rhythm of the land itself. Anthropologists note that the themes within this myth parallel real-world purification practices and harvest ceremonies still observed in Japan today. Before planting or gathering rice, communities performed rites to honor the kami, the spirits of rivers, fields, and the rain. These ceremonies involved offerings, chants, and libations, designed to ensure that human labor was in harmony with the unpredictable forces of nature. Susanoo's crafting of sake and ceremonial placement of the vats mirrors these traditions, reinforcing the idea that heroism was inseparable from ritual, courage inseparable from reverence. The narrative emphasizes patience. Susanoo did not force the serpent to approach, nor did he act impulsively when Orochi's movements stirred the waters. Instead, he observed from hidden vantage points, allowing the creature to move in accordance with its instincts. Each approach to the vats was anticipated, each response measured. This patience is a hallmark of the myth, a lesson that even the mightiest force must respect timing, cycles, and the delicate interplay between aggression and strategy. Through this preparation, Susanoo transforms from wandering exile to disciplined guardian. The storm that had once torn through the heavens without direction now moves with precision. The creation of sacred sake is not merely tactical, it is symbolic. The intoxicating brew represents the harnessing of chaos, the act of turning raw energy into a tool for protection rather than destruction. In doing so, Susanoo embodies a principle that resonates in early Japanese culture. Strength without wisdom is perilous, but strength guided by ritual and understanding becomes transformative. The scene is electric in its quietness. Moonlight filters through clouds, casting silver lines across the river. The vats glimmer with sacred liquid, each one reflecting the anticipation of the coming night. Forests shiver as the wind rustles leaves, as if whispering counsel to the storm god. Every sensory detail, the smell of wet soil, the sound of distant flowing water, the sight of dark hills under twilight, situates the myth in the natural world that birthed it. This is a confrontation rooted in place, a battle whose meaning is inseparable from the land itself. Susanoo's strategy, as crafted in myth, also carries moral and philosophical weight. It is a testament to the idea that courage is not the absence of fear, but the careful channeling of it. By preparing thoughtfully, by aligning his actions with both ritual and observation, the storm god demonstrates that heroism is as much about intellect and patience as it is about power. The serpent's eventual defeat is only possible because Susanoo respected the boundaries between mortal and divine, chaos and order, instinct and intention. Furthermore, this preparation illustrates the continuity between myth and community practice. Early Japanese settlements relied on rituals to navigate uncertainty, floods, storms, and environmental hazards demanded both respect and action. By embedding these practices into a story of divine confrontation, the myth reinforced the cultural logic of preparation, patience, and sacred observance. Communities listening to the tale would see not just a god defeating a serpent, but the embodiment of human understanding and survival in a world shaped by unpredictable forces. As night deepens over the Izumo Valley, the river reflects the growing tension. The 8 vats of sacred sake stand ready. The winds carry the distant sounds of the serpent stirring, and the storm god himself waits with a calm that contrasts the fury that once defined him. Every element of the preparation, placement of the vats, timing of approach, the ritual purification of the offering, is a convergence of divine foresight and human-like caution. In this balance lies the narrative's enduring power, heroism entwined with the sacred. The chapter closes on a quiet, expectant note. Susanoo does not yet strike. The serpent does not yet succumb. What is left is a lesson as old as the stories themselves. The greatest victories are seldom achieved by force alone. They require wisdom, reverence, and an intimate understanding of the forces that govern the world, both seen and unseen. In crafting a plan through ritual, drink, and patience, Susanoo becomes more than a god of storms. He becomes a model of strategic courage, a reminder that preparation is itself a sacred act, and that true heroism begins long before the clash of battle. The valley waits, the river flows, the wind bends the reeds, and in the quiet anticipation of dawn, a storm god shapes destiny not through fury, but through mindful, sacred action. Chapter 9. The Battle Beneath the Crimson Sky. Before victory is seen, there is only the tremor of anticipation, the charged silence that precedes the roar. Picture the valley of Izumo under a sky painted with the deep reds of dusk, clouds swirling like molten iron, their edges ignited by a sun sinking behind distant hills. The river, reflecting crimson light, seems to pulse with the heartbeat of the world itself. Here, in this liminal hour between day and night, the stage was set for the confrontation that would etch Susanoo into both myth and memory. Yamata no Orochi, seduced by the sacred sake, slithered with lethargic menace into the carefully arranged vats. Each of its 8 heads, towering and glistening, dipped in unison, drinking deeply, unaware that the moment of vulnerability had arrived. In the stillness of this trance, the valley held its breath. Winds stilled. Even the river's surface seemed to pause, the usual murmurs of water subdued in reverence for what was about to unfold. This was not merely a beast subdued by drink. It was the embodiment of nature itself lulled by ritual, the chaotic made accessible by divine cunning. The chronicles recount the moment Susanoo drew his blade, a sword forged from heavenly essence, sharp enough to cut through the air as if it were silk. But the myth emphasizes not only its physicality, but the weight of intention it carried. In every swing, the storm god's fury and focus were inseparable, intertwining cosmic wrath with measured strategy. This was a battle that transcended mortal comprehension. Heaven's force meeting the unyielding chaos of earth, divine purpose confronting elemental instinct. Picture the first strike. Lightning streaks across the crimson sky, illuminating the valley like fire on water. Orochi's roar erupts, a sound that shakes the hills and reverberates through the river's coils. Trees shiver and bend under invisible pressure. The ground trembles with each motion of the serpent, and yet within this violence, the precision of Susanoo's strategy emerges. Every blow is placed with awareness of both ritual and geography, each movement guided by the meticulous preparation of the preceding night. The battle rages across the riverbanks. Scale meets steel. Water churns into frothy torrents as Orochi thrashes, the flow of the Hie River mirroring the serpent's rage. Sparks fly where blade strikes scale, and thunder answers the struggle overhead, as if the heavens themselves have joined the fray. Ancient storytellers painted this scene not only as divine heroism, but as an echo of storms experienced by early communities, the floods that tore through fields, the violent windstorms that bent forests, the raw, overwhelming power of natural forces distilled into a single mythic clash. Each head of the serpent is a cycle, each tail a current of danger. Susanoo moves with relentless purpose, his stormborn energy tempered by the patience of ritual and planning. The myth preserves a rhythm here, moments of violent attack punctuated by pauses where the storm god surveys, recalibrates, and strikes again. This cadence mirrors the ebb and flow of nature itself, the way floods surge and recede, the way windstorms rage and then quiet. In myth, heroism becomes an extension of environmental understanding. Susanoo's courage is inseparable from the knowledge of the forces he contends with. As Orochi falters, heavy with intoxication and weariness, the narrative heightens its tension. The serpent's movements become erratic, unpredictable, yet still terrifying. The valley itself seems to mourn and cheer simultaneously, rivers rising and falling as if bearing witness to the drama. Shadows cast by the crimson sky stretch across the landscape, elongating the forms of god and serpent alike, blending the real and the mythical, the tangible and the symbolic. Archaeologists and folklorists have long noted that these elements of myth, the eight heads, the river's fury, the storm-laden skis, reflect lived experiences of natural disaster in early Japan. Seasonal flooding, violent storms, and the unpredictable forces of rivers shaped both the psyche and the rituals of ancient communities. In transforming these environmental realities into narrative spectacle, storytellers imbued Susanoo's battle with layered significance. It was both heroic and instructive, a divine mirror of human struggle against overwhelming odds. The climax approaches. With a calculated strike, Susanoo severs one head, then another, working methodically despite the thrashing of the remaining coils. Sparks from his blade catch in the dark water, briefly illuminating the panic in the serpent's many eyes. Each movement is ceremonial as much as martial. The myth presents not a chaotic fight, but a deliberate enactment of cosmic order restored. The storm god embodies both fury and justice, teaching that courage, tempered with wisdom and preparation, can transform fearsome forces into triumph. Even as the final head falls, the river surges violently, carrying away debris and the fading echoes of the struggle. The valley exhales. The crimson sky softens to twilight, and in the quiet aftermath, Susanoo stands not merely as a conqueror, but as a guardian who has turned chaos into protection. The narrative lingers here, emphasizing reflection over celebration. Heroism, in mythic terms, is inseparable from sacrifice, strategy, and an intimate understanding of the natural world. This cinematic moment also preserves the spiritual resonance of the myth. The sword, the sacred sake, the ritualized approach. Each act conveys a message about the relationship between humans, gods, and the environment. Victory is achieved not through reckless force, but through alignment with the rhythms of nature and the wisdom embedded in ritual practice. In early Japanese communities, such stories reinforced cultural values: respect for the land, reverence for the cycles of water and weather, and the understanding that courage and preparation must coexist. Picture the valley once more in the fading light. The river flows calmly, winding like a silver thread through the hills. Trees rise from its banks, scarred but standing. Orochi is no more. Its presence lingers in memory, a testament to both fear and triumph. Susanoo, the storm god, surveys the land with quiet pride, aware that the battle beneath the crimson sky has left an indelible mark, not only upon the valley, but upon the hearts and minds of those who would retell the story for generations. As this chapter closes, the echo of the battle lingers. The roar of the serpent, the flash of the blade, the rhythm of river and storm. The legend preserves not only the spectacle, but the lessons encoded within it, that courage is born of strategy, that heroism is measured as much by understanding as by strength, and that even the most fearsome forces of nature can be confronted when wisdom guides action. In the quiet that follows, the valley breathes once more. The river flows, the reeds sway, and the storm god stands, a figure of courage forged beneath the crimson sky, a guardian whose story continues to illuminate the timeless dance between humanity, nature, and the divine. Chapter 10: Discovery of the Heavenly Blade. The valley lay in stillness, The storm having spent its fury, the serpent silenced beneath the weight of the land and the echo of divine intervention. Picture Susanoo standing amid the aftermath, the river's waters glinting faintly under the soft light of dawn. Mist clung to the banks, curling around reeds and rocks like smoke, and the scent of wet earth mingled with the faint tang of blood and sacred sake. In this quiet, the storm god's gaze fell upon the massive form of Yamata no Orochi, stretched across the valley like a mountain of coils and scale. It is within this monumental carcass that the myth records a moment of revelation, a discovery both tangible and symbolic. As Susanoo traversed the serpent's length, he noticed something gleaming within one of its tails, a radiance unlike the reflective shimmer of scales or water. With careful hands, he severed the tail, revealing a sword of extraordinary craftsmanship. Polished, radiant, and imbued with a presence that seemed to pulse with divine authority, this weapon was the Kusunaga no Tsurugi, the grass-cutting sword. In the myth, it gleamed with the essence of heaven itself, a bridge between celestial power and mortal understanding. The sword's emergence from the body of Orochi is more than narrative flourish. It embodies a recurring theme in Japanese myth, the uncovering of divine treasures through trial, courage, and insight. To slay a monstrous threat and claim its hidden jewel was to demonstrate mastery not only over chaos, but over the spiritual currents of the land. Here, Susanoo transitions from Stormborn Exile to a figure capable of shaping destiny, carrying a relic that would echo across centuries of human and divine history. The significance of sacred objects, such as Kusunaga no Tsurugi, extends beyond mythic narrative. In early Japan, swords, mirrors, and jewels were not merely decorative or martial instruments. They were symbols of authority, divine favor, and spiritual legitimacy. To possess such an object was to assert connection to forces beyond the mortal realm, a tangible link to the heavens. Archaeological findings suggest that ceremonial blades, often buried or enshrined, functioned as both tools and tokens, uniting the political, the sacred, and the symbolic. Through the discovery of the sword, Susanoo establishes a narrative lineage. The blade would not remain his possession indefinitely. It would later come into the care of Amaterasu, and through her divine favor, be presented as part of the treasures that legitimize the imperial line. The three sacred treasures, the sword, the mirror, and the jewel, are central to Japan's enduring conception of emperorship. Kusunaga no Tsurugi, born of courage and divine insight, thus becomes a vessel of political as well as spiritual power, linking the heroic deeds of gods to the authority of mortal rulers. Picture the moment of lifting the sword. Its weight is not merely physical. It carries history, ritual, and the accumulated resonance of divine action. The blade cuts the air with a subtle hum, vibrating in harmony with the rhythm of the river, the whisper of the wind, and the lingering echoes of Orochi's fury. Its shine reflects more than light. It reflects the promise of protection, the assertion of cosmic order, and the transmission of sacred authority from gods to men. The myth encodes multiple layers of meaning. At a practical level, the sword is a reward for bravery and skill. At a symbolic level, it demonstrates the principle that power, whether divine or mortal, emerges from trials and alignment with cosmic forces. By uncovering the weapon from the body of the serpent, Susanoo not only neutralizes a destructive threat, but also reveals the hidden potential lying within chaos, a principle that resonates in both governance and spiritual understanding in ancient Japan. Furthermore, the narrative reflects how material culture and storytelling intertwine. Sacred blades, often enshrined in Shinto temples, served as both ceremonial objects and symbols of continuity. They were presented to rulers to confer legitimacy, reminding all who witnessed them that authority was not merely inherited or seized, but sanctioned by the unseen hand of the divine. Kusunaga no Tsurugi, emerging from Orochi's tale, transforms an act of heroism into a foundational myth of rulership, bridging the realms of gods and humans with a tangible artifact. Archaeological studies of early Japanese settlements reveal that sacred swords were carefully preserved, often in conjunction with mirrors and jewels, forming a triad of ritual significance. These objects functioned as conduits between past and present, human and divine. By situating Kusunaga no Tsurugi within the story of Susanoo, ancient storytellers codified an understanding that power is inseparable from moral courage, spiritual alignment, and mastery over the forces that shape existence. The sword becomes both a weapon and a testament, a narrative device that encapsulates the broader cosmology of the region. In this moment of discovery, the valley itself seems to acknowledge the completion of a cycle. The river's waters settle into steady channels, the wind drifts lazily through the reeds, and the mountains bear silent witness to the unspoken promise of order restored. The storm god, once cast down from Takamagahara, now stands as a figure of mediation. His journey through exile, wandering, and confrontation, culminating in the revelation of a sacred object that carries the weight of both history and destiny. As the chapter closes, it is worth reflecting on the enduring resonance of this myth. Kusunaga no Tsurugi is more than a legendary blade. It is a narrative bridge linking divine heroism with mortal authority, chaos with order, and myth with political structure. Through Susanoo's discovery, ancient communities encoded lessons about courage, preparation, and the moral imperative of leadership. The sword serves as a reminder that power is inseparable from responsibility, and that the forces which shape the world, whether storm, river, or serpent, can be understood, respected, and harmonized through courage and insight. The valley breathes again under the soft glow of morning light. The serpent is vanquished, the waters calm, and the sacred blade glints with promise. It is here, in the quiet aftermath, that the human and divine converge. Susanoo lifts Kusunaga no Tsurugi not merely as a weapon, but as a symbol of cosmic order, a link between gods and emperors, a testament to the enduring interplay of myth, authority, and history. In the stillness of the Izumo Plains, one can almost hear the echo of this moment across centuries. A story of courage revealed, a blade unearthed, and a bridge forged between heaven and earth that would shape the spiritual and political heartbeat of Japan for generations to come. Chapter 11. Reconciliation with the High Heavens. The heavens themselves held their breath. Picture Takamagahara, the lofty realm above mortal eyes, suspended in quiet radiance, clouds drifting like silver veils across infinite skies. The light of Amaterasu, radiant and warm, touched the celestial palaces with soft gold, yet a shadow lingered, the restless memory of storms and chaos that once tore through these sacred halls. Into this space descended Susanoo, the storm god, his figure cutting through drifting clouds, the sacred Kusunaga no Tsurugi held reverently in his hands. The journey back to the high heavens was not one of triumphal parade, but of deliberate, measured movement. The storm god, once impulsive and tempestuous, now carried the weight of experience and reflection. The serpents he had faced, the rivers he had crossed, the rituals he had enacted, all had transformed him. Each step toward Amaterasu was laden with intention, a silent acknowledgement of past transgressions, and the desire to restore what had been fractured. In mythic narrative, this journey symbolizes the path from chaos to balance, a movement mirrored in nature itself. After the storm, the wind settles and rivers carve their courses with newfound purpose. Amaterasu awaited, her gaze steady, embodying the continuity of light, warmth, and life. The myths emphasize her presence not merely as sister or deity, but as cosmic principle, the sun that nourishes the world, whose cycles regulate day and night, growth and rest. The tension between storm and light, wind and sun, had once manifested in destruction and disorder. Now, through the offering of the heavenly blade, Susanoo sought to bridge these opposing forces, presenting both a tangible gift and a gesture of contrition. The act of reconciliation carries layered significance. The presentation of Kusunaga no Tsurugi is more than the return of a weapon. It is an offering of respect, a symbol of cooperation between elemental powers. By entrusting the sword to Amaterasu, Susanoo demonstrates that true strength lies not in domination, but in understanding and harmony. Ancient storytellers encoded this lesson for early communities. The natural world, with its storms and sunshine, floods and fertility, depends upon balance. The cycles of life, from harvest to planting, from storm to calm, were reflections of this principle, mirrored in the conduct of divine figures. The myth situates this reconciliation as both personal and cosmological. The siblings, once locked in rivalry, embody broader forces: light and storm, order and chaos, creation and destruction. Their reunion restores equilibrium to Takamagahara and, by extension, to the world below. Seasonal patterns, agricultural rhythms, and environmental stability are all bound to this cosmic harmony. Communities listening to or recounting this tale would recognize that balance in heaven reflects order on earth, and that discord among divine forces manifests in real-world disruption. Picture the ceremonial exchange. Susanoo kneels, holding the sword with both hands, its gleaming surface reflecting the golden rays of the sun goddess. Amaterasu extends her hands, receiving the gift with solemn acknowledgement. No words are needed. Mythic narrative conveys meaning through gesture, intention, and cosmic resonance. The heavens themselves respond. Clouds part gently, wind stirs with soft murmurs, and the light of the sun extends farther into the realm below. In these quiet actions, storytellers captured the essence of restored order. Reconciliation is active, deliberate, and transformative. Historians and scholars note that such myths functioned as allegories for social and political harmony. Just as the gods' cooperation maintains celestial balance, so too did human leaders rely on unity and ritual observance to preserve societal stability. The return of the sword symbolizes the bridging of differences, the alignment of intent, and the conscious effort to restore trust and function after conflict. In essence, the story preserves lessons of diplomacy, humility, and respect, rendered through the cosmic theater of divine interaction. Susanoo's character, transformed by exile, battle, and discovery, now embodies restoration. Where once he was known for reckless storms and chaotic impulse, he becomes a figure of deliberate action, of understanding the consequences of power. His legacy shifts from disruption to stewardship, illustrating a key theme in ancient Japanese cosmology, that the forces which shape the world, whether tempest, flood, or sunbeam, are most potent when wielded with awareness and balance. The Valley of Izumo and the high heavens of Takamagahara are intrinsically linked in the myth. The storms that once swept through the mortal plains are now tempered by reconciliation, suggesting that divine order influences the rhythms of life below. Rivers, crops, and seasonal winds respond not only to natural cycles, but to the symbolic harmony enacted by gods. Through Susanoo's gesture, the story communicates the ancient belief that human prosperity depends upon alignment with both celestial and earthly forces. The narrative emphasizes reflection and transformation over spectacle. The sword, once a tool of victory, now becomes a token of concord. The storm god, whose fury shaped valleys and rivers, now embodies restraint, wisdom, and honor. Amaterasu, radiant yet patient, embodies the sustaining light that guides both divine and mortal realms. Together, they demonstrate that reconciliation is an act of strength, and that true power manifests not in unchecked force, but in the restoration of order and trust. As the chapter closes, imagine the sky above Takamagahara settling into gentle hues. soft golds blending with the lingering rose of dusk, clouds parting to reveal a calm expanse, and a faint breeze carrying the memory of storms subdued. The cycle of light and storm continues, yet now it moves in harmony, the tension resolved and balance restored. In these moments, myth preserves a timeless lesson. That unity among opposing forces, whether divine, natural, or human, sustains the order of the world and nurtures life itself. Susanoo's journey from tempestuous exile to heroic restorer exemplifies this principle. His actions remind us that courage must be coupled with reflection, that confrontation may lead to discovery, and that reconciliation is itself a heroic act. In restoring peace to the high heavens, he affirms that balance is both sacred and necessary, and that the cycles of life, storm and calm, chaos and order, endure only through deliberate harmony. The heavens shimmer in quiet affirmation. Rivers below reflect the softening light, reeds sway with subtle rhythm, and the echoes of tempest give way to gentle whispers of renewal. In the union of storm and sun, myth and reality converge, offering a vision of harmony that transcends time. Through Susanoo's reconciliation, the narrative teaches that the forces shaping existence, whether celestial or terrestrial, find their most enduring expression in equilibrium, and that even the fiercest storms may yield to the quiet power of peace. Chapter 12. Establishing Sacred Rule in Izumo. The plains of Izumo lay bathed in the soft light of dawn, the river winding like silver through fertile fields, mist clinging to the low hills, and the air thick with the scent of earth renewed. Here, in this valley once shadowed by fear and legend, a new presence took root. Susanoo, the storm god who had descended from the celestial heights, battled the monstrous Yamata no Orochi, and reclaimed divine authority through courage and wisdom, now turned his gaze upon the people and land that would become his enduring realm. The tempest had passed, leaving not only calm, but the fertile ground of order and governance, a canvas upon which the divine and human could intertwine. Susanoo's transformation from wandering exile to guardian figure is central to both myth and early regional identity. No longer merely a deity of storms, he assumed the role of protector, mediator, and source of spiritual legitimacy. The communities of Izumo, scattered across riverbanks and hills, found in his presence a reassurance that the destructive forces of nature could be understood, respected, and guided. Myths depict him walking among villages, the air around him carrying both the memory of thunder and the promise of safety. His arrival anchored divine favor in a tangible space, creating a sacred geography that shaped ritual and belief. The establishment of sacred rule is reflected in the intertwining of myth with lineage. Local clans began claiming descent or patronage through Susanoo, embedding his heroic deeds into genealogies and ceremonial traditions. Shrines were built, festivals performed, and oral stories recounted, each act reinforcing the connection between divine heroism and human authority. By positioning themselves in relation to the storm god, these early families could assert political legitimacy, presenting leadership as both sanctioned by the heavens and rooted in the moral narrative of courage and protection. The myths themselves encode lessons about governance and order. Susanoo, though powerful, acts not with arbitrary force, but with purpose and justice, rewarding loyalty and punishing disorder. Through his actions, communities recognized that leadership required more than strength. It demanded wisdom, foresight, and adherence to cosmic balance. His victories and decisions became models for human rulers, offering a divine framework for emerging systems of authority in early Japan. Picture the sacred sites that arose in his honor. Shrines perched atop hills, torii gates framing paths toward temples, and sacred stones marked by offerings. These structures were more than religious spaces. They were tangible markers of political influence, social cohesion, and cultural memory. The presence of Susanoo in these sites symbolized both protection and hierarchy, linking the spiritual and temporal in a way that guided communities' understanding of duty, loyalty, and ritual practice. Archaeological evidence suggests that such sanctuaries functioned as both ceremonial centers and loci of regional power, reflecting the inseparability of myth and governance. Susanoo's narrative became a template for regional authority. Clans tracing themselves to his favor claimed not only divine ancestry, but the moral responsibility that came with it. Leadership was justified not by conquest alone, but through the embodiment of virtues exemplified by the storm god: courage in the face of danger, wisdom in planning, and respect for cosmic and social order. Through this lens, mythology becomes a mechanism of social structure, encoding norms and expectations into stories retold across generations. The valley itself, shaped by rivers and forests, mirrors the stability and fertility brought by Susanoo's guardianship. His presence legitimized the tamming of the natural world, the cultivation of crops, management of waterways, and protection against floods, as extensions of divine favor. In this way, myth and ecology intertwine. The hero of legend is not abstract but tangible, influencing both human behavior and environmental stewardship. Communities came to understand that harmony with the land, ritual practice, and allegiance to sacred authority were interdependent, forming the foundation of regional governance. Through festivals and ceremonies, Susanoo's story was continuously reaffirmed. Rituals commemorating the defeat of Orochi, the discovery of the heavenly sword, and the reconciliation with the heavens reinforced communal memory. These observances did more than honor divine deeds. They embedded a moral and political framework into everyday life. The storm god's influence extended into civic identity, codifying relationships between leaders, sacred authority, and the natural world. In this way, Izumo became not only a geographical region, but a spiritual and cultural epicenter, with Susanoo at its heart. The mythic narrative also emphasizes relational power. Susanoo's authority was legitimized not in isolation, but through his interactions with both gods and humans. By engaging with Amaterasu, protecting mortals, and establishing shrines, he modeled a balance of assertiveness and cooperation. His sacred rule was thus not imposed, but recognized, reflecting a belief that true leadership arises from alignment with divine will, ethical action, and the consent of the community. These principles resonated in early Japanese society, shaping the ethos of emerging noble families and their claims to legitimacy. Consider the transmission of this influence across generations. Oral storytelling, ritual dance, and ceremonial enactments of Susanoo's deeds preserved both the memory of heroism and the structures of governance. Young leaders were taught to emulate the storm god's courage and wisdom, while elders interpreted natural events, storms, floods, and bountiful harvests, as reflections of his favor or disapproval. Myth, ritual, and environmental observation fused into a coherent cultural system, where divine precedent reinforced human order and sacred narratives justified political authority. As Susanoo established his presence in Izumo, the line between myth and reality became intentionally blurred. His story provided the framework for interpreting the world, offering explanations for both natural phenomena and social hierarchy. The divine protector of rivers, valleys, and villages became a symbol through which communities understood justice, power, and responsibility. The storm god's legacy was not only spiritual but institutional. It created a model for leadership rooted in moral courage, sacred authority, and ecological awareness. In the quiet aftermath of battle, the valley thrived. Rivers flowed steadily, fields ripened, and communities prospered under the protective gaze of Susanoo. His deeds, once extraordinary, became ordinary touchstones of daily life, invoked in prayers, memorialized in shrines, and woven into the fabric of clan identity. Myth and history converged. establishing a pattern that would endure. Sacred ancestry as a foundation for political power, heroic narrative as a template for moral governance, and divine presence as the stabilizing force behind societal cohesion. The chapter closes on a scene of serene grandeur. Mist rises from the river, the reeds sway in gentle rhythm, and the sun illuminates the hills with soft, golden light. Susanoo, once Tempest and Exile, now stands as guardian and patriarch, his influence resonating through generations. In establishing sacred rule in Izumo, he forged a lasting connection between divine narrative and human authority, between myth and governance, ensuring that the balance of heaven and earth would endure not only in stories, but in the social and spiritual life of early Japan. In these quiet moments, one realizes that Susanoo's legacy transcends legend. It codifies the principle that authority rooted in courage, wisdom, and sacred alignment endures. Through the storm god's presence in Izumo, ancient communities understood that leadership, like the natural world itself, requires harmony, reverence, and the enduring strength of myth to guide both mortal and divine affairs. Chapter 13: The Legacy Given Through Descendants. The hills of Izumo, once echoing with the clash of serpent and storm, now hum with the quiet passage of generations. Picture the valleys bathed in soft light, rivers threading silver through fields where communities thrived, and the wind carrying whispers of deeds long past. Here, the presence of Susanoo did not fade with time. It transformed, flowing through lineages, woven into the very identity of clans, rulers, and warriors who claimed descent from the storm god himself. Myth and history converge in this inheritance, linking divine heroism to mortal authority. Susanoo's progeny, whether tangible or conceived through narrative imagination, served as living conduits of his power and virtue. The stories tell of sons and grandsons whose courage and insight mirrored the god of storms, whose leadership brought stability and protection to their people. Each generation carried the memory of his deeds, not as abstract legend, but as a marker of identity and legitimacy. In early Japan, claiming descent from a divine ancestor was more than familial pride. It was a declaration of sacred authority, an assertion that leadership was sanctioned by forces beyond the human realm. Genealogical records, preserved in chronicles like the Kojiki and Nihon Shoki, reflect this intertwining of bloodline and divinity. They trace the lineage of regional rulers, demonstrating continuity of governance under the auspices of a god whose narrative encompassed both heroism and moral example. These accounts reveal that early Japanese leaders understood political power as inseparable from sacred connection. To invoke Susanoo in ancestral memory was to legitimize rulership, strengthen alliances, and maintain cultural cohesion across disparate clans. The legacy of Susanoo is also expressed in the ritual and ceremonial life of these descendants. Festivals, processions, and offerings honored the storm god not only as a mythic figure, but as a source of familial blessing. Through these practices, communities internalized the principles encoded in his story: courage tempered with wisdom, strength guided by justice, and authority balanced by responsibility. The ritual remembrance of ancestry became a vehicle through which myth informed morality and governance, reinforcing social cohesion while preserving spiritual continuity. Picture a young chieftain, standing on the banks of a river once disturbed by divine storms, invoking the name of Susanoo in prayer before battle. In that invocation, myth transforms into living guidance, the courage to confront adversity, the insight to navigate conflict, and the recognition that authority carries both privilege and duty. Descendants became embodiments of these virtues, inheriting not only a name, but a moral imperative that shaped the trajectory of communities and regions. The influence of Susanoo's bloodline extended beyond Izumo, permeating the broader tapestry of early Japan. Warrior families and local rulers claimed affiliation with his lineage, weaving his narrative into their own history and using it as a standard of legitimacy. Through this diffusion, the storm god's legacy became a unifying force, connecting disparate regions through shared mythic memory and reinforcing the perception of a coherent, divinely sanctioned social order. Communities recognized that adherence to the values of their divine ancestor ensured both protection and prosperity. Historical evidence suggests that such claims of divine descent were not merely symbolic. In a world where political authority depended on loyalty, ritual, and moral recognition, invoking Susanoo's name provided tangible leverage. Leaders could consolidate power, mediate disputes, and establish their moral right to rule through ancestral connection. Mythic genealogy became a tool of governance, where the narrative of a storm god slaying chaos and restoring order legitimized the authority of mortal rulers, intertwining spiritual and temporal domains. Yet the legacy was not purely political. It also shaped cultural identity. Songs, poems, and oral stories celebrated the deeds of Susanoo and his descendants, reinforcing social norms and communal memory. Children learned of the storm god's courage and of the responsibilities inherited by those who claimed his lineage. Through these stories, early Japanese society transmitted values, reinforced cohesion, and connected the present to a cosmology that blended human experience with divine example. The narrative became both educational and ethical, guiding behavior through the weight of ancestral precedent. Consider the symbolic resonance of the sword, Kusanagi no Tsurugi, which passed through these lineages. It was more than a weapon. It was an emblem of divine favor and inherited authority. In the hands of a descendant, the blade represented continuity with Susanoo's deeds and principles. Its presence affirmed that power was not random or solely martial, but moral, spiritual, and historically grounded. The sword thus became a material link between myth and governance, an object through which divine narrative found expression in human affairs. Through the centuries, the stories of Susanoo's descendants became intertwined with broader spiritual and political evolution. As clans expanded, territories shifted, and rulers navigated the complexities of early state formation, the storm god's legacy offered a framework of moral and spiritual guidance. It reinforced the idea that leadership is accountable, that authority carries obligations, and that connection to sacred ancestry provides both legitimacy and responsibility. Myth became law, memory became governance, and divine narrative became enduring social architecture. In reflecting upon this lineage, it becomes clear that Susanoo's influence extends far beyond his own actions. His journey from tempestuous exile to heroic protector, from celestial renegade to reconciled force, is echoed in the lives of those who claimed his blood. Each act of courage, each measure of justice, and each exercise of leadership among his descendants resonates with the principles established by the storm god. The mythic foundation shaped not only political structures, but cultural consciousness, linking generations through shared memory and divine precedent. The chapter closes with a quiet vision. The sun rises over the plains of Izumo, illuminating villages, shrines, and rivers alike. A gentle wind carries the memory of storms long past and the quiet power of heroic deeds. Children play near the riverbanks, unaware yet connected to the enduring narrative of Susanoo. Elders recount tales of courage, resilience, and divine favor. The line of descendants stretches across time, a living testament to the storm god's enduring influence. In the continuity of bloodlines, ritual, and memory, Susanoo's presence persists. He becomes both a historical and spiritual architect, shaping identity, governance, and cultural unity. His legacy, carried through descendants, ensures that the principles of courage, balance, and sacred authority endure, echoing across centuries of Japanese history. In the quiet interweaving of myth and lineage, one can trace the storm god's lasting imprint on the land, its people, and the enduring consciousness of a nation guided by the resonance of divine precedent. Chapter 14. Transformation into Folk Protector. The wind moves gently through the valleys of Izumo, carrying the scent of rice fields and river reeds, a soft echo of storms long past. Where thunder once tore the sky and rain flooded the lowlands, now communities rise in quiet reverence, their rituals and festivals a testament to memory and adaptation. Susanoo, once a tempestuous god of exile and wrath, has transformed. From the destructive force that shaped rivers and shattered forests, he became a guardian whose presence reassured both land and people. This is the evolution of myth into protection, of fear into devotion. The passage of time softened the raw fury of Susanoo's storms, but it did not diminish their memory. Stories of floods, winds, and serpents endured, preserved in chronicles, oral tradition, and ritual practice. Communities, attuned to the rhythms of the natural world, began to reimagine the storm god not as a force to fear, but as one who could be invoked to maintain balance. Ceremonies, prayers, and offerings arose, linking human endeavor to divine favor. By performing these rites, people sought both literal and symbolic protection from disease, famine, and the unpredictability of weather, and established a moral and spiritual connection with a once fearsome deity. Shrines dedicated to Susanoo became focal points of this transformation. Constructed along riverbanks, hills, and crossroads, they served as intermediaries between mortal life and celestial influence. The torii gates framed the transition from ordinary space to sacred ground, inviting worshippers to engage in acts of reverence and supplication. At these sites, festivals reenacted mythic episodes: the defeat of Yamata no Orochi, the discovery of Kusunaga no Tsurugi, and the reconciliation with Amaterasu. Through these communal expressions, Susanoo's narrative was woven into the everyday life of the people, his story both remembered and enacted as a source of protection and identity. The adaptation of Susanoo into a folk protector reflects a broader cultural pattern. Early Japanese communities, facing the vicissitudes of nature, understood that myth was not static. Deities evolved alongside human experience, reshaping their roles to address the practical and spiritual needs of successive generations. Susanoo's fierce storms became metaphors for challenges in daily life, and his heroism was reinterpreted as guidance, guardianship, and moral example. Rituals invoking him for safety, health, and agricultural prosperity demonstrate the elasticity of myth and how divine narratives were harnessed to maintain communal stability. Consider the seasonal observances in his honor. During planting or harvest, villagers would offer prayers and symbolic sacrifices, asking Susanoo to calm winds that could destroy crops or bring rain to nourish the earth. Processions would wind along riverbanks, torches flickering in the dusk, reenacting mythic encounters that symbolized victory over chaos. In these rituals, the storm god's role shifted from warrior to steward, from embodiment of fear to emblem of protection. Through repetition, ceremony, and communal memory, Susanoo's essence became inseparable from the well-being of the people and the land. Artistic representations also reflect this transformation. Carvings on shrine gates, ritual masks, and painted scrolls depict Susanoo with a tempered visage, holding symbols of authority and protection rather than destructive force alone. Even the imagery of the serpent he once defeated became less a symbol of terror and more a reminder of the power to overcome adversity. These visual narratives reinforce the adaptation of myth to cultural needs, allowing worshippers to engage with the deity in ways that were both meaningful and practical. The storm god's evolution into a folk protector also illustrates the negotiation between divine narrative and human experience. Communities translated the epic deeds of a celestial hero into everyday practices: prayers for children's safety, supplication during storms, and blessings for travelers. In doing so, Susanoo became a personal guardian, a divine presence embedded in routine life. He was no longer confined to the distant realm of gods or mythic battlefields. He lived in rivers, in the wind, and in the hearts of those who called upon him for guidance and security. This transformation was gradual, shaped by centuries of oral transmission, ritual adaptation, and social necessity. Where earlier narratives emphasized conflict, exile, and storm, later traditions emphasized balance, intervention, and protection. Such evolution demonstrates the capacity of cultural memory to reshape even the most formidable deities, ensuring their relevance in shifting historical and social contexts. Susanoo's story, once the tale of chaos and confrontation, became the living narrative of guardianship, moral order, and communal well-being. In the quiet of twilight, one might witness the enduring traces of this legacy. Smoke rises from the hearths near shrines, children follow elders along ceremonial paths, and prayers echo softly across fields and rivers. The storm god's presence is felt in the rhythm of these acts, not as a fearsome force, but as an assurance of continuity, safety, and cosmic harmony. His legend, shaped by both celestial conflict and mortal devotion, continues to inform communal identity and spiritual practice. Susanoo's transformation also speaks to the adaptability of myth itself. Stories of gods, once anchored in celestial events or catastrophic forces, evolve to meet human needs, reflecting the interplay between narrative, belief, and lived experience. The storm god's enduring presence as protector illustrates that myths are not merely records of ancient imagination, but frameworks through which societies negotiate uncertainty, morality, and the natural world. In honoring him, communities enact the continuity of tradition, blending memory, spirituality, and practical wisdom. As centuries passed, Susanoo's protection extended beyond Izumo, influencing broader regions and inspiring festivals, rituals, and local myths throughout Japan. While the sword he discovered remained a symbol of imperial authority, the god himself became accessible to all, a guardian for those navigating life's uncertainties, a mediator between divine power and human endeavor. His role as protector demonstrates the capacity of myth to adapt without losing resonance, and how cultural memory preserves both the force and the guidance of powerful figures across generations. The chapter closes in a serene moment. The sun sets behind the hills, casting long shadows across fields and rivers. A gentle breeze whispers through reeds, carrying faint echoes of storms long past. Worshippers light candles along shrine paths, invoking the storm god not for vengeance, but for guidance, health, and protection. Susanoo, once Tempest incarnate, now watches as guardian and guide, a bridge between past heroism and present devotion. Through this transformation, one sees the enduring power of myth, to educate, to protect, and to guide. Susanoo's journey from exile and fury to folk protector demonstrates that even the most formidable forces of nature and narrative can be tempered by time, reflection, and human need. His presence continues to shape spiritual life, local tradition, and cultural memory, proving that the legacy of a storm god is not measured solely in the force of winds and floods, but in the quiet assurance of protection he offers to all who honor him. Chapter 15. Storm God of Eternal Memory. Dawn rises over the hills of Japan, the river valleys glimmering with mist, and the wind moving softly through reeds and pine. In these quiet moments, the memory of storms past lingers, carried not in destruction, but in story. Susanoo, once Tempest incarnate and exile of the heavens, has become more than legend. He is the embodiment of enduring memory. His journey from restless storm to divine protector is woven into the spiritual fabric of the land, preserved in poetry, festival rites, and sacred chronicles. The storm god lives not only in myth, but in the rhythm of human devotion, a presence at once fearsome and compassionate, commanding yet intimate. Susanoo's enduring memory rests upon his dual nature. He is both destructive and benevolent, chaos and guardian, reflecting the complex forces of nature and human experience. Ancient storytellers understood this duality, encoding it in myths that could speak to generations across centuries. Rivers, once feared for their floods, became sacred pathways. Winds, once destructive, became blessings when invoked in ritual. Through these narratives, communities internalize the idea that power is neither purely fearsome nor entirely gentle, but a force to be respected, balanced, and guided through moral action. Festivals across Japan celebrate this balance, each a living testament to the storm god's influence. During these ceremonies, participants honor his victories, reenact his deeds, and offer prayers for protection, health, and prosperity. In dance, song, and ceremonial procession, Susanoo's story is relived, retold, and reshaped, ensuring its relevance for each new generation. The festivals are not only acts of remembrance, but acts of communion, bridging mortal experience and divine precedent. Through ritual, the narrative of exile, courage, and guardianship becomes tangible, experienced, and embodied by the community. Sacred texts, from the Kojiki to regional chronicles, preserve his story with remarkable fidelity and poetic depth. These writings record both his deeds and the values they imparted, the necessity of courage, the importance of balance, and the moral responsibility that accompanies power. They reflect early Japanese cosmology, where natural phenomena were inseparable from spiritual forces, and human life was intertwined with the ebb and flow of divine will. In preserving Susanoo's narrative, these texts provided moral and practical guidance, ensuring that the storm god's lessons were neither forgotten nor divorced from everyday life. Consider the poetry inspired by his legend. Verses recounting his battles, reconciliations, and protections evoke imagery of wind-lashed valleys, sunlit hills, and rivers overflowing with divine energy. The literary tradition preserves not only his deeds, but the emotional resonance they carried: grief, courage, triumph, and compassion. Through these artistic expressions, Susanoo's presence remains alive in the imagination, a figure whose struggles mirror human challenges and whose victories offer hope and guidance. The enduring power of Susanoo's narrative lies in its adaptability. While early myths emphasized conflict, later retellings emphasized guardianship and moral example. The storm god story could be invoked to explain natural events, teach ethical principles, or reinforce social cohesion. In every adaptation, the essence of his journey, transformation from exile to protector, remains central. This capacity for evolution ensures that the myth survives the passage of centuries, sustaining cultural memory while remaining responsive to the needs of each era. Susanoo's presence extends beyond ritual and literature into architecture and sacred geography. Shrines dedicated to him mark the landscape with permanence, aligning natural features with spiritual significance. Riverbanks, hills, and sacred groves serve as focal points for devotion, each site a material reflection of the storm god's enduring role in human life. Travelers, pilgrims, and villagers alike encounter these sacred spaces, recognizing the protective and moral influence of Susanoo in both landscape and community. Through these interactions, his legacy is continuously renewed, physically anchored in the land, and spiritually embedded in the lives of the people. The narrative of Susanoo also functions as a mirror of human struggle and transformation. His exile, battles, and reconciliation reflect universal themes: conflict and resolution, chaos and order, grief and courage. Each retelling invites reflection on the human condition, offering a framework for understanding adversity and the path to restoration. By embodying these themes in divine form, Susanoo's story provides a moral compass and a symbolic model for navigating life's challenges. The storm god becomes both mentor and mirror, divine guide and reflection of human resilience. Through centuries, his myth shaped not only spiritual life, but political and social structures. The invocation of his name, the claim of descent from his lineage, and the integration of his story into regional identity all reinforced cohesion and authority. Communities recognized that reverence for Susanoo was intertwined with civic stability, moral behavior, and cultural continuity. In this way, memory and narrative become instruments of both personal guidance and societal governance, linking divine precedent to human endeavor. As the sun sets behind distant hills, painting the sky with streaks of crimson and gold, the presence of Susanoo is felt in the quiet movement of the wind, the flowing of rivers, and the lives of those who honor him. Children play along sacred paths, elders recount his deeds, and pilgrims light candles at shrine gates. In these moments, myth and memory converge, reminding all that the storm god's legacy is not bound to a single time or place. His story is lived, experienced, and renewed in every act of devotion and remembrance. Susanoo's journey from tempestuous exile to compassionate protector demonstrates the enduring adaptability of myth. Legends survive by transforming alongside the communities that preserve them, finding relevance in new eras while retaining the essence of their origin. Through poetry, ritual, sacred text, and communal memory, the storm god's narrative continues to resonate, providing a mirror for human courage, moral responsibility, and the reconciliation of chaos and order. The chapter closes with a vision of quiet reverence. A river glimmers under the moonlight, torii gates stand solemn along forest paths, and the wind stirs with a gentle, almost imperceptible power. Susanoo watches, not as a distant deity of fear, but as a guardian and guide, his story etched into the heart of Japan. In this eternal memory, the god of storms endures, a testament to the strength of myth, the resilience of cultural memory, and the enduring human need to find meaning, protection, and moral guidance in the forces that shape both the natural and spiritual world. In the silent rhythm of rivers and the soft rustle of wind through sacred groves, one understands that Susanoo's legend is timeless. It survives because it evolves, because it speaks to both mortal experience and divine precedent. Through each retelling, each ritual, and each poetic verse, the storm god's story remains alive, offering insight, solace, and the profound reminder that the memory of courage, transformation, and protection transcends the ages. Conclusion: where tempests become light. The sky over Izumo softens into twilight, rivers reflecting hues of gold and crimson, and the wind whispers through the valleys that once trembled under storms. Susanoo's journey has carried him from the heights of Takamagahara to the fertile plains of mortal life, from exile to hero, from tempest to guardian. His story, etched into chronicles, oral tradition, and ritual practice, endures not merely as myth, but as a reflection of humanity's eternal engagement with the forces that shape existence. Fear and courage, chaos and order, sorrow and renewal. In the celestial conflict with Amaterasu, we see the resonance of natural cycles, of light and storm locked in perpetual rhythm. In his descent to Izumo, the exile becomes metaphor, revealing that trials are not mere punishment, but paths to purpose and transformation. His battles, from Yamata no Orochi to the challenges faced by his descendants, illustrate that strength alone is insufficient. Wisdom, patience, and moral courage are the measures of true heroism. Across centuries, communities have honored him not for wrath alone, but for protection, guidance, and the balance he brings between the forces of nature and human life. Standing at the edge of sacred rivers, amidst the quiet hum of shrine bells, one perceives the deeper truth of Susanoo's legacy, that even the fiercest storms carry the promise of calm, that sorrow can shape resilience, and that exile can become the crucible of purpose. In understanding his mythic origins and historical echoes, we recognize a timeless message, woven into the cultural fabric of Japan, that the interplay between divine power and human endeavor shapes both destiny and memory. Susanoo emerges from the mists of legend not as a deity of destruction, but as a guardian whose light rises from the shadows of tempests. His story reminds us that through turbulence comes clarity, through struggle comes strength, and that even the most violent storms leave traces of enduring hope, wisdom, and calm.